All right, let's talk about some things to do to make your car more reliable with your old VW. There's a lot of little rules to follow. I know she's a wee bit dirty. Got to give this thing a full wash here shortly. But there's a lot of things you can do to keep the car original. A lot of people say, the old saying is, original is the best way to keep it most reliable. That's pretty much always a good rule of thumb to follow. So if you have everything original as it was originally, that's never a bad thing. But some of us, on today's roads, when you have a 6-volt car and you've got taillights that size and that's all you got in the back of your car, there's a good chance at night you might get run into. So you need to think about what other people are looking at, when you're driving your old car. So we're going to talk about some original things to do and some modified things to do. We're going to talk about 6-volt and 12-volt and to make the car still be reliable with all of those different things. So stay tuned and let's see what transpires from this. Some of these things are going to be just little tiny things. Some are going to be major modifications, and so you're going to really want to watch some of the stuff you guys might already know. And of course, we'd love to see your comments, like the video, make sure this gets around to everybody, and see if we can help some people, especially the ones that are new, learn how to make it more reliable. See this fuel line here? This is German 5mm braided hose. I've heard some people say in some of the European countries that they can't run this anymore. It goes decrepit. Here in the US, absolutely the only hose to run is this stuff here. If you're using like a regular 1/4-inch size hose, just the solid rubber stuff, that's going to be a problem typically. And if you're in the US, I know our fuel seems to be okay. It doesn't have the acidic problem maybe that the other ones do. In some of the other countries you might be needing to use something else. But you got to get the German stuff. It has to look just like that. Let's get you up close. It's got to look like that. That's German hose. Okay? US German hose. For those of you guys who are wondering, I typically drive all over the place in my cars, and I rarely need to bring tools with me. I very rarely have much for tools in my cars because they don't usually break down, and that's kind of rare when you have a 50-year-old car. So one of the things that I do as well is the points quality today is horrible. Even the Bosch points, the condensers are the issue. The condensers used to look like this old guy right here. There's actually a number stamped on the top of it. I think it's right there. This one's kind of old because I'm running it till it stops, and when it stops, I'm gonna put pointless in here. So they used to be silver like that, okay, and they had a number pretty well stamped in somewhere on the bracket or on the condenser, and the new ones are all like a gold color. Those gold color things are garbage. They don't last very long. You'll have more problems with those than you will with a pointless ignition. There's a lot of different pointless ones to go with. The cheapest one that's not bad, it used to not be very good, is EMPI, and it's not a bad one. There's one that's cheaper than that comes in like a white package. You don't want to get those. Those are no good. I've found that the latest version of the EMPI pointless is about the same quality as Petronix or the other one, CompuFire. I almost think they're made all by the same people. That's just my guess, but they look the same. I've had them blast about the same. All of them do have some level of issues. So another thing that's always a good idea if you're taking a long trip is to bring an extra one in your glove box. When you buy the EMPI one, they're not too expensive. You can afford to buy two for about the price you pay for one, the CompuFire. So I buy the empty ones. I have had one that went bad. It started just giving me trouble right out the get-go, and I replaced it, and I haven't had any trouble with it since. When my buddy had his shop, they were using those and had about as many of the CompuFire or the Petronix ones that failed too, about same in numbers. It was about the same average, but you get some sort of warranty with those. Empty, pretty much nothing. Another quick thing while we're talking about the word empty, I would say not to steer clear from them all the time. I would say carefully inspect anything that you put on your car that has this name on it, and really look it over and make sure that everything's tight, everything's done right, and make sure the machine work is done good. Make sure that it's just, look at every aspect of it before you put it on the car. Those are things that I always do. Now, if you're looking for reliability and you want to use some performance, I would stay away from dual carbs. A lot of people will tell you, oh, dual carbs are no big deal. You know, constantly, you're going to be constantly adjusting them. Reliability for reliability reasons, not liability, reliability reasons, having dual carbs is kind of a pain in the butt. They constantly get jets plugged, they constantly come out of tune, and you're going to be fiddling with them a lot. So for me, I forgo some of the power, and one of these e-gas carbs has a choke. It is much more reliable once you get it jetted than the dual carbs. And if you want to, you can step that up even more. If you want to spend a little more money, dual carbs are expensive, but they also make a couple of different really good fuel injection systems for these cars that make them very reliable and can make them run on multiple types of fuels. I know that the VTEC one by Low Budget is actually really well engineered, and Low Budget is just, he's a genius, really. The guy is like super smart. I've talked to him, and you know, he builds the hex files for you to use the VTEC. So if you just go and buy a VTEC fuel injection system and try to modify it, put it in your VW, you know, it might not be the right route. I would go through Low Budget and get his whole system if you're going to do it, because you're going to end up buying the software from him anyway. So because he does the hex files for the computer so that it runs the right stuff. He'll just ask you all the details of your engine, and then that makes your engine run a lot more efficient. So it's going to make it more reliable. It doesn't overheat as easily. Things like that are really good to do if you're going to do modifications to your engine. The basic rule always applies. You should always, no matter what condition, what engine you have in your car, you should always have a good engine seal. You should not have any additional holes in their back tin. If you have these things here to keep your engine from overheating, very important to make sure that if you have these and you don't have heater boxes, that you have a freeze plug in the hole. So like, I haven't got my heater boxes finished built for this. I'm building heater boxes before I build them and then make them clamp on. I'll show you on the other bus in a second for the here, but you have a freeze plug in that hole to make sure that you don't have an air leak. And you notice that I have foil tape over these because I don't want air circulating from the back of the engine, back up and getting cycled into the fresh air box. That'll make the engine run hot and makes it more unreliable. You're talking about vapor lock, breakdowns, all kinds of stuff. So also to keep my engine reliable, I run a mechanical fuel pump. A lot of guys will disagree with this. That's okay. I've had a lot more problems with the electric fuel pumps than I have with these mechanical ones. Now, you typically will have some problems with these, and typically what go wrong with them, and this is a really bad thing, is it will leak gas into your oil. So that's why it's really important to constantly check your oil on your old VW. And it's not just about the the amount that's in it. It is, because if you see it increasing, so if the amount of oil in your engine is increasing, that's telling you that you probably got gas leaking into your oil. So that's what you're really checking every time you check the oil level. You're checking the oil level, but you're also checking to see if there's gas in your oil. Because if there's gas in your oil, your fuel pump might be going bad, or you've got an issue possibly with carburetor leaks going down, draining into your system. That's a problem. That's a very serious problem. And if you keep an eye on that oil, that's always what's going to tell you whether that fuel pump's going bad. So I've had better luck with these than I have electric pumps. Other guys may disagree with that, but that's just my opinion. That's how I always do it. Another thing for reliability is once your generator, your Bosch generator and your Bosch regulator go out, it's never a bad idea to change to an alternator. So if you've got a 12-volt system in your car, or if you have 6-volt and you're going to upgrade it to 12-volt, really putting a 12-volt alternator in is much more reliable than any of the aftermarket generators. If you want to and spend all the money, you can get yourself another Bosch generator and regulator and put it in, but honestly, they are very expensive. This is a cheaper route, and these last just as long, in my opinion, as the Bosch generator and regulator will, and is actually probably better, more even voltage, probably keeps your battery up better. It just makes your car much more reliable to have the generator, especially back when we had the old Motorola ones. They were even better than these Chinese ones, but they're really not too bad. So it's also a good idea to keep a Bosch coil. All my coils, even this one, it doesn't have a sticker on it anymore, but it's a Bosch, and the Bosch ones last a little longer. They have less issues. They are more expensive, but having a Bosch coil is actually a really good thing for reliability. And your ignition wires, as long as they're the solid core ones, you can get the ones that are Riley Auto Parts. They're not bad. They're actually pretty good. And another thing that's really good is to have original is a Bosch cap and rotor. They're not cheap, but you only buy them. You very rarely have to change it, so it's one of those one-time purchases you probably have for years. Worth the money. If you're running dual port, red German dual port seals, very important. The cheap black ones, they crack. Since I mentioned it earlier, these are my heater boxes. I clamp them. They're clamped onto the thing here. It's not really a reliability thing, but it might be something you want to check out if you want to have heaters and you have merged system exhaust. It does work. It doesn't work great, but it does work. It takes, if you had ice on your windshield, it'd probably get it off. If you had if you just wanted your hands a little warmer, it really does help a lot. And all it is just a heater box that clamps onto the muffler. There's a video out on that I put out, so you can look for that if you want. You'll probably find it. Some of the simple things I do on my VWs is, instead of running one of those little, I don't know, I call them dollar store style from the it used to be $1 at Auto Parts, probably $10 now. But instead of running one of those cheap flasher relays, I always get these electronic ones. You can get these on Amazon or eBay, and they are much better. They're more reliable. They last a lot longer than the others. So you'll find that your blinkers will work even if one of your bulbs gets loose or something like that, and it'll just flash kind of fast. But at least they'll be working. So until you can get that, typically it's usually like the bulb comes loose, so you gotta beat on it a little bit. Volkswagen get bad connections. There's also things you can do to fix that. One of the things I do is I'll take my turn signal switch apart when I'm doing my restoration, and I will spray it with this stuff. Don't just use brake clean. This stuff works much better. It will clean the contacts inside there. I've had bad switches, even the like my headlight switches, stuff like that. I'll spray them out with this stuff and move them around a bunch of times, and then you'll find the contacts start to work. I've had an old ignition switch, which the original ignition switches are much better than the ones you get, the aftermarket ones. I spray this stuff inside, move the switch around a bunch of times. A lot of times it'll fix all the bad contacts inside of it, and you'll have less issues when you go to start your car. Little tip there. Another important thing on your VW is wherever you have holes or wires go through, if wires go through a hole, you should always have a grommet. That's why I always have these Harbor Freight grommet sets. For anywhere I have a penetration, I always have a grommet, because if the wire wears through, now you get a short. If you don't have one, it's like for your battery cable, this is, you can use radiator hose, you can use a lot of different things. Cut it like this, put a slit in it, cut all the way through, slide that over your hose, and then use silicone to hold it in place in lieu of a grommet. So you can use one of these too if you want. That also works if you have multiple wires, or maybe you've already got the hole already there and you got the wires going through it and you realize, oh, there's no grommet on that hole. Another thing I use on my terminals, this is a really key thing. If you use this the way that I do, you need to make sure you rinse it in really well and get all the acid off of stuff. But I use this and put some of my fuses in there for a second, or all the different connections. I'll drop my connectors in there that I'm using the original ones if I want to keep the original ones, or you can always replace them at slip connectors, and then rinse them off really good with this. And I use also the brake spray, not brake spray, electrical spray, clean them off really good after that. But this helps get that tarnish off of them. You can drop your fuse block in there, do the same thing. Also solder the connections on your fuse block. There's a little rivets on the back. If you want to do that, that helps to keep the connections good, especially if you have a 6-volt car. So my 6-volt car with small tail lights, I actually added 2 other tail lights because I drive this car enough. My other one, I'm probably going to add more tail lights to it too as well, because people, I'm telling you, today on the roads, people don't know to look for a car with little bitty tail lights like this, especially if they're 6-volt. You can't even see them most of the time at night. I also see those little inverter boards up there. I have a video on changing them to 12-volt and LED. So I have 12-volt lights in the back, make it a lot brighter, and I have LED turn signals back there and in the front as well. I have a video on this subject. You guys can check that out if you want. On the old cars, these are a lot more reliable with these than 6-volt. If you have these terminals here, if you have the other ones with 6-volt, honestly, a lot of you guys want to keep your car original. Some guys are taking them back to 6-volt, which I don't know why, but it's really better off if you have the slip terminal car. It's really better off if you can. And they changed from the 36 horse. If you have a 36 horse engine, I understand why you want to run at 6-volt. There's just not that many generators out there. You have to get the generator rewound. If you have a late model, really the 40 horse, it's really easy to add, put a 12-volt alternator on there. It will increase your reliability. And they have issues also with the bottoms of the fuse block. Rivets can get loose. If you get 12 volts, usually it's not an issue. 6 volts, it's all kinds of problems. So really, honestly, if you want to get rid of some of those problems, just change it to 12 volt on a later model. The problem you'll notice on this car is when it's running, because I have 12 volt turn signals, I end up with and I have 12 volt. These lights are all 12 volt. Is that the generator light's always on dim. So if you guys notice when I drive it, you'll see that sometimes people are like, hey, your generator light's on. It's like, it's not on. It's actually really dim. It's hard to tell at night. It looks brighter than it does during the day. But one of the things you should always do when you turn your ignition to the on position, you should always see both lights lit. If your generator light is not lit and you have an alternator, your car will not be charging. Because if that light is out, that's what energizes your alternator and makes it work. So if I've seen guys go out and replace their alternator and not knowing that their bulb was out. So the bulb does not work. In other words, if you have a alternator, okay, and here's your little indicator for the dash, this behind here. If you start your engine up and you don't have a bulb in there, and this doesn't get, it has to get a little bit of power to it right when it first starts, or it won't charge. So what you can do is, if you want to test it and you notice that you think your car's not charging, you test it, it doesn't have, 13.5 volts or more, you can take a lead and jump from here to here with the engine running for a second, and then all of a sudden it'll start charging. So I've had several people over the years replace a good alternator because their indicator light was out. Mechanics call this bulb check. They need to both be on before you start the car. One of the other things for reliability is disc brakes. You end up not having to adjust the brakes quite as often, and disc brakes have less tendency to leak than drum brakes do. A lot of times the wheel cylinders go out on the drum brakes more often than a caliper will start leaking. Calipers can last years and years and years. I've had them last way longer than the drum brakes, moved 15, 20 years without having to do anything to them. And of course, you end up with better stopping, which is going to save your life, save your car. Same thing with the tail lights. Having more light in the back of your car, if you get rear-ended and it ends your life of your car, or ends your life, it's much better to have the extra light in the back of the car. All right, this is going to cause a comment war, but man, I've been schooled big time over the years on this. See this oil right here? I only use Castrol or Kendall in my VW engine. And you can use multi-weight. It's better if you use a solid weight sometimes, some people will say. But if I'm using Castrol, I can use the 2050. I have no issues with that. If you want to shorten the life of your engine, use a different oil. You will not see any Valvoline racing oil in my shop. I used to run that stuff, okay? And I used to drive my car really hard. I would drive it like 80, 85 mile an hour with a 412 transmission, 1835, thin wall cylinders, and it ran super hot. And I drove the hell out of it when I was younger. And I'm gonna tell you, I took the thing up to 100 miles an hour way too many times. I'll tell you what, when I was using Valvoline racing oil after 1,000 to 2,000 miles, if I took that out, it would just run out like water. It was completely broke down. There was nothing left of it. It was totally 100% broke down. And we're talking about Valvoline Racing straight 50 weight. I switched to using Castrol, okay? And everybody I know in the Volkswagen world either use Castrol or Kendall now. And we all found out the same thing. I switched to using Castrol, same amount of time, driving the hell out of it, putting the screws to it and everything else, running it way too fast, way too hot. I take this oil out and it came out dirty, the same viscosity as it went in. So you guys who want to argue about it, I've tested it myself. Put the comments down, go for it. And I encourage you, try the same thing. You'll probably find the same results. We have found that the formulation between Castrol and Kendall is almost the same. I don't know what it is. One of the issues you run into, some of the guys will talk about, is having not enough ZDDP in the oil. If you're concerned about that, you can add some STP or Lucas here, and that'll help your cam wear issues. Personally, I haven't had problems from that, but they did have a time when they regulated that pretty heavily, and then from what I understand, they took some of the DDP out, and then they went back to the regulators, and added it back in. I'm not sure on that, but I'm not an oil chemist, but I just know what I've seen. And from what I've learned, Quaker State, Pennzoil, all have a wax base inside of them, paraffin base they call it, and this is much better oil. A problem I believe with the Valvoline Racing is it has too much detergent for a Volkswagen, and that's why it just breaks down. So if you want to build an engine, performance engine, and you want one that's really strong, reliable, lasts a long time, you can always go to Turnkey, CB Performance, buy one of their engines. It's not cheap. It'll cost you a ton of money, but everything that they do is well engineered. There is 100% tested and thoughts put into everything they put together. So you get what you pay for. But if you're like me and you don't have that kind of money, it's not, like I said, it's not cheap. I think their engines are upwards of 10 grand, you know, somewhere in that area. So if you're not like that and you're going to build your own, this is 100% Chinese engine almost. I'm trying to think if there's anything German on it. I think basically the coil and some of the seals and stuff like that are German. And the fuel pump and case are both Brazilian. But, you know, people say the Chinese stuff's all junk. You know, if you get the right stuff and you really check it out, it can be very reliable. I have a friend who has pretty much what's in this engine here. This is what we call the bulletproof engine build. You can watch the videos on that. There's a video series on the channel. And pretty much all the parts that we put in here are some of the best stuff. The bearings, in fact, are German. That's one thing I go with, is the Club and Schmidt bearings if they're not available. If they're not, I'll get the silver line. But I try and stay with Club and Schmidt if I can. A lot of times lately, they haven't been available, some sizes or whatever. I've ran into some problems there, so I had to run silver line ones. But, you know, if you build your own engine, aluminum case. A lot of people go, you know, the magnesium case is what they put in the car originally. I'm going to tell you something. You know, when you run an aluminum case, and I was talking to CB Performance about the same thing, and they just are like right on the bandwagon. The aluminum case does not expand and contract as much as the magnesium case, and therefore more often your valves are not going to come out of adjustment. This thing runs super quiet. You don't even hear the valves. I adjust them to 0, and they very rarely move. They hardly ever have to be adjusted. So, you know, getting to the new technology of a metal that has less expansion and contraction, like the old magnesium case did, can be more reliable. You have less issues because there's less movement. And, you know, I got friends of mine with this setup, they're getting 150,000 miles out of engine build. That's completely unheard of. Some of the best engine builders I've ever seen with mag case engines, with all original stock, German parts, we were getting 100,000 miles max out of an engine. And that was, you know, if you saw a 100,000 mile engine, you were like, wow, 100,000 miles, that's pretty good. Now, much more than that, especially I can imagine if I had fuel injection on here, it might even be better than that. We're using, in fact, some of the guys who I worked with were the guys who started using stainless steel valves. These have stainless steel valves in the heads, and yeah, they're made in China, but if you check everything out really good, like I said, just like we do with the MP parts, look at everything, every piece very carefully, and make sure that the machining was done right. Make sure that all the little machining pieces are out of stuff, and just make sure it was done properly. Even measure everything again, and before you put it together, to make sure that it's done properly, that it's all in tolerance, you know, and then put it together. You know, we end up with really good long-term results with these engines. If I've got a mag case that's good, I'll still run it. But if I've got to buy a new case, it's got to be aluminum. So if you're running stock brakes, you can always get the German wheel cylinders, but almost by the time you spend the money for the German wheel cylinders, having your drums refinished or replaced, you really want to consider putting on the disc brake kit. Honestly, you'll be better off in the long run. But using German parts has always been one of the things that we've always gone by as being good quality. Today, a lot of stuff's changed. A lot of times you got to really inspect your German parts because they may not really be German. In fact, I call them Chinese German because we don't really know whether they were really made in Germany, assembled in Germany and made in China, or I don't know. But it just doesn't seem like the same German parts we used to get. So be aware that you might not be getting what you think. So if you just kind of use this rule of thumb when you build your car or you work on your car, that I call this idiot proof. When I build something, I think of what the worst idiot could do to it, and then I put it together so that as best I can so that they wouldn't be able to damage what I'm doing. So try and make your car idiot proof, even though you're going to be the one using it, because what that does is you spend the extra time and care when you assemble something to make sure that no matter what, you put up a whole different bunch of scenarios that could happen. Well, what if they did this? What if they did that? What if somebody did it? And then try and make sure that the repair that you do will still withstand through that. And that will always help you with the long term on your Volkswagen. So if you're driving your old VW up a hill and you start to hear it start to ping, let off the gas, drop a gear, slow down. That means your engine's probably getting hot on you. If you're running a performance engine, one of these 72 pass coolers, oil filter setup, full flow in the case, doghouse fan shroud. If you don't know what those are, watch the Bulletproof build. They're all in there. On this one, I actually have a Type 4 engine, Type 4 cooler on it, so it has I think 2 more rows on the oil cooler. And we expanded the fan shroud out a little bit, modified it by hand so that it has the best cooling it could possibly have. I can literally just go up a hill and floor it. I have low compression. I can just stand on the gas pedal. No pinging goes on. Doesn't even get hot. It just, I built it like a tractor. Stay away from more than 9-to-1 compression in your street engine. That'll be a good idea to stay out of this one's like 8 3/4. The other one I have is 9. Every once in a while I hit a hill on the 9-to-1 engine, and it has all the same cooling stuff except for the 4 pass or whatever. I don't know what it is, a Type 4 cooler. I'll hear a little ting, 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 let off the gas, drop a gear on it on a hot day. On that one, this one here, I can just stand on the floor. It doesn't even care. Another thing, key to a Volkswagen, is running premium fuel. People will fight me on this. They say, oh, well, it has low compression. Let me tell you about why it works better on premium fuel. With a Volkswagen being air-cooled, you have a higher combustion temperature. It has a higher combustion temperature than any gas engine, any regular water-cooled engine. So because it has a higher combustion temperature, the pressure, even though the compression ratio is lower, it is higher. It's a higher combustion pressure than your regular engine. So that's why you need to run premium fuel. Back in the old days, they had leaded fuel. Today we don't. So running premium fuel will keep your engine more reliable, keeps it running cooler. It's just a smart thing to do. Yeah, it costs more money, but honestly, it's really worth it. The only time that I run anything less than that is if I'm running my old 36 banger and I'm running that thing in the winter when it's not hot out, then I know my combustion temperatures are going to be lower. I can run some regular gas in it every once in a while, but when it comes to summer, premium, always. In this engine, 8 3/4-to-1, premium fuel. It's all it ever sees. And guys, I used to run my old Chevy 283 10-to-1 compression with regular gas, and it was no issue. But I'm telling you, on a Volkswagen, the compression being lower, the actual combustion temperature is much higher, and when you add those two things together, it makes a much higher pressure in the cylinder. That's what you end up with after a combustion. It's not just your compression when you use your compression tester, it's what happens when it combusts. When it combusts, it's a higher pressure That's why you run premium. So a lot of people tell me, you know what, these old VWs aren't very reliable. Yeah, you know, there is some degree of unreliability to them because you've got, you know, it's a 50-year-old car. The parts aren't made the same as they used to be. But if you really take your time and inspect your parts and spend a little more time, that's why I always tell people, have another car if you're going to use your Volkswagen as a daily driver, so that you can spend the proper time to do things right on it and spend the extra time to re-engineer some of the parts that you might get or inspect them really well. You know, you may not be able to do that if you're driving it as your primary daily driver. So honestly, I'm not saying don't drive it. You could use it as a primary daily driver, but you have a second car so that you can drive that, so you can work on it properly, so you can do the maintenance, because there's a lot more maintenance to do on these. A lot more time that you have to spend working on them. They're not as hard to work on the new cars, but you do a lot more of it. So be sure to take care of your car. Drive it well, drive it a lot, have fun in it. I'll talk to you guys in the next video. If you like this one, I may come up with another video with some more mods. I'll start writing them down, and we'll do an addition to this. If this video goes pretty well, then I'll talk to you in the next one. Please like, share, and subscribe.